We're live right now. We're going to play our warning. Then we'll be right back to introduce Jim and tell you about his journey. Warning and disclaimer. The views and opinions expressed on this live feed are those of the guests, speakers, and or hosts, and do not necessarily reflect the beliefs, official policies, ethics, or positions of the content providers, advertisers, additional hosts, and or guests, hosting sites, groups, or entities attached to this programming. Viewer discretion is advised. Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to bring Jim up, and Jim's going to tell you part of this story. We're going to talk about it for the next half an hour here on Geek Insider's Geek Speak, the INDEE edition. So let me introduce Jim. How do you, Angelis? Am I saying?
Yeah, you can say Angelis, yeah.
All right, so Jim, tell them who you are and a little bit about your backstory.
Well, so I consider myself to be a native New Yorker, but I was actually born in Montreal, Canada. And I guess during the sort of political instability back in the mid 70s, my parents decided to move me and my brother to New York City, where I grew up. So at that time, I was starting kindergarten, in Queens, New York. We lived there pretty much until high school. And I was basically in the same neighborhood as the Cuomo family. Everybody who knows Cuomo is Governor Cuomo is Andrew Cuomo is the older brother of Mario Cuomo, and which I had met, and I also went to school with the younger brother, Chris Cuomo, who's on CNN. So I am in my heart a New Yorker, even though I was born in Canada. But at the time, I guess just about the time I was about to start my college and university studies, my mom decided that it was a good time. One of the reasons was to go back to Canada was because it was affordable, more affordable than any education that you'll get in the United States. And we weren't very wealthy. We were just sort of, working class, middle class family, but still fairly educated and law abiding. And, so I have a very strong, solid background, religious. And so there's a culture shock back in my, I guess, birthplace of Canada. And still, I tried to sort of refit in, sort of get back to sort of my Canadian background or roots, if you want to call it that, of my education. And I went to college, and then I went to university, 2 college diplomas, and actually into 3 university degrees. And after that, I got recruited right away by the Canadian government, the Canadian federal government over there, and decided to stay there as opposed to return back to the United States. And then, of course, I got married, and then I, started a family. Married for 16 years, and then had 2 children. At the time, the last time I saw them was my daughter just turned 8, and my son was 3.5 years old. So everything was fine in terms of career and everything. I mean, you always have sort of the hiccups and stuff along the way in trying to build up your career in the public service. The problem with me started, I guess, during my marriage. I think I would say 16 years is sort of where I reached the peak hold, and that's where things went bad in my marriage. But even before I go there, just want to give you an idea that I was always sort of the geek. I was a geek who read comic books. I always wanted to write a comic. Since the age of 15, I wanted to write a comic book. And I even drew. I was good enough to sort of draw layouts, and so that we can give the idea of an artist to sort of come up with the comic book. But it never went anywhere because I got distracted with life. Got into a rock and roll band instead. Then played bass. After that, dropped that to get married, and then start a family and a career in the federal public service. So, like I said, no major issues at work. The problem was the marital breakdown, and this happened because my wife was having an affair, and we tried to sort of resolve it, get her to go to counseling, consulted our priest because we're very religious, as an Orthodox Christian. And it wasn't working well, and she decided that she wanted to move forward with the divorce. And so we started to go with the divorce, and that's when things started getting ugly on her side because she didn't want to respect the process for the divorce. To determine custody of the children and then division of financial assets. And I guess as closer and closer we came towards the scheduled date to go to court to start the divorce process, she became increasingly anxious, fearful, afraid she was going to lose everything, especially custody of our son and the financial assets, she became increasingly violent. I was sort of forced to live with her because I didn't have any other place to go. But I should go backtrack a little bit. During the marriage, I noticed that whenever she was frustrated, angry, or upset, she would resort to violence every once in a while. It was one incident I remember clearly. It was Valentine's Day back in 2000. And she nearly broke my hand because I wouldn't give her access to my passwords, to my email, and my other social media sites, and because she thought I was actually having an affair, when in reality she was the one having the affair. And so I was always careful around her. I was never wanted to provoke her, never wanted to sort of, push her or anything, and never wanted to upset her because I knew what she was capable of. I mean, people saw a petite, Asian woman, Southeast Asian woman, and thought she was harmless. She wasn't dangerous in any way, but she had a temper, and when push comes to shove, she would resort to violence to resolve the matter. And then I found out afterwards, that she was also doing the same thing with our daughter. Whenever I wasn't home, I was either working overtime at work or I was, across the country somewhere. And she would also, I found out afterwards, be abusive towards our daughter. But what triggered the divorce was her attempted abduction of our 3-year-old son with the guy she was having the affair with all this time. And he came in one time with her to abduct our 3-year-old son. I tried to take our 3-year-old son out of the country with his passport, and I had called the police, and they came, but they didn't really resolve the issue. They didn't want to get involved. Number of reasons. One is because, first of all, neither my wife nor the guy she was having the affair with or myself are what you considered mainstream Caucasian population. We're sort of clearly visible minorities, ethnic minorities. When people look at me, they don't quite know what I am. They think, okay, you've got a Greek name, but you don't look Greek. You look Arabic, maybe Pakistani, maybe, African American. And at the time, we were living in a neighborhood which I would not consider really upscale. It's sort of a lower middle class neighborhood. And, neighborhood was mostly, people on the lower social economic, pay grade. So when I had called the police, they automatically knew from my home phone where I was living at. They knew that I was not in a very upscale neighborhood. They heard I was a man, that I was seeking help from my wife, and they didn't really care that she was alone or not. And so they really didn't take me seriously when I tried to tell them this was a serious matter, that I didn't want my son to be kidnapped, and then this woman had the potential to be dangerous alone. Now she's not alone. And yet, they didn't want to get involved. The police didn't want to get involved. We were talking about an Italian Canadian, police officer, and he was accompanied by an Indian, Canadian, I guess, officer who was more of a spectator than anything else. And so they wanted the matter to be resolved pretty much in family court, and didn't want to get involved. So I couldn't get them to help me get a restraining order. I couldn't get the judge in the area to get a restraining order against her, and I was forced to live with her until the time we went to court for the divorce. And so when as we were getting closer, like I said, go to the divorce court date, she became more violent towards me and the children, and until the point exactly 1 month before, 30 days before, to the day we were supposed to go to court for the first time, start the divorce process, she just attacked me. She beat the crap out of me. I mean, if you see photos of my injuries of my face, and there were also photos to my other parts of my body, including my penis, you would see that I really, was getting my butt kicked. And she ended up dying in the process because, I didn't know what was going on at the time, but after 6 years, we finally figured out she died of a rare heart condition common among people in her age group, 40 years old, from Southeast Asia. But during those 6 years, they kept telling that I was guilty of killing her and murdering her because of the affair, because I wanted custody of the children. And because I didn't want to share the family assets, when the reality was the other way around. They didn't really care about my injuries, the fact that the cause of death was inconclusive. They couldn't figure out how she died exactly, and then they didn't really care that it was my blood all over the apartment. And they pretty much brought me in front of a jury, which the first jury which found me guilty of murder, and had to go to jail for life in prison. And it took me my lawyers about 3 years to appeal the decision, go back to court for a retrial, and the second jury finally acquitted me. But at the process, I ended up losing my job with the federal government. I lost years of my freedom. All of my life savings went into debt to pay lawyers to prove my innocence, and I lost custody of my children. They were put up for adoption illegally because the social workers thought that I was guilty and that I didn't deserve to have my kids living with me. So that's where I am now. I've written an autobiography about it. It's called The Ottawa Way. Guilty by Gender in Canada's Capital. And so, and it's being turned now into a movie, Hollywood movie. The screenplay is being finalized now, but I'm getting tons and tons of support from people in the industry, actors, producers, you name it, screenwriters, and the whole purpose of this is I really want to make people aware that the concept of domestic violence exists. It's a reality among men. Not only in the United States, but Canada, but also England and all I've done my research for the book, and it's all over the world, but no one really takes it seriously. No one really acknowledges it as a serious matter and a growing matter. It's growing. I mean, the number of cases being reported keeps getting higher and higher. And it's time for people to realize that, men get beat up by their women all the time, and either because men are afraid to come forward to admit it, or when they do come forward, they're not believed. So that's basically, in a nutshell, what I'm doing. Like I said, we can just. I lost, like I said, I've lost everything in my life. I'm trying to get my kids back. Hopefully this year, if not early next year, when they become adults. And I'm finding other ways to reinvent myself in the workforce. I'm now flipping homes. I'm renovating homes. I'm flipping homes for a living because there's no prospects for me in being ever as rehired again as a public servant. Only because of the stigma associated with being arrested for murder, and even to get exonerated. They still don't really want you, among them, because you're giving them a bad name, a bad image. And I'm also sort of doing other work. In addition to this book, which I just finished, and hopefully will be out soon, I'm going to be working on my first graphic novel. Like I said, the idea I had since I was 15 years old, and it's been fleshing out now, and I'm looking forward to it. And it's a great idea that I had, and it's sort of other artists and other writers in industry have sort of come up with similar ideas, but not quite exactly what I had in mind for my own graphic novel.
And I want to thank you for coming on and sharing that. That's a lot to have to talk about publicly. You did nothing wrong. You are the victim of abuse. You were acquitted. Yeah. There should be no stigmatism behind you, yet there is, and that's just the reality. We won't mention the site, but you had shared with me some places that had taken to blogs and reinvented how they wanted to frame something. That's got to be awful. That's got to be an awful scenario to go through. And I give you tons of credit for the courage that you show by being able to come in, talk to us candidly about this. It's got to be hard. I know you've done it a lot, but it's still got to be hard to realize I survived all of this. And for the record, I have experienced domestic abuse, both in the child-parent relationship from my mother, even a little bit for my father. I don't think he abused us, but he, there was yelling and stuff. We don't realize how dangerous that yelling becomes until we become adults, and how things get out of control very quickly, even with people who love each other, even with people who aren't going through a divorce. But a divorce is a horrible thing to go through. Anyone who hasn't gone through it, you see a person turn on you that you never expected to see. And like you said, her fear and all that, I could see that all adding up. And having to then deal with what you did in the horrific way of it. Was there ever a point where you almost felt like I must have done something wrong? It is my fault. Like, was that ever because I know you said it took 6 years to realize that little thing that changed the whole. That's a Perry Mason moment, right?
Yeah.
Aha!
Right.
I figured it out, but it's 6 years of your life gone.
Well, I always knew in my heart I didn't do anything wrong, but the thing is, people kept reinforcing the message. You must have done something wrong. You did something wrong. How can we have a dead body here? We don't know what was going on. She wasn't necessarily the nicest person around in the world. You know, she was cheating on you. She tried to kidnap your son. You know, and then you were divorcing her, which didn't make sense because I was the one who initiated the divorce in court. But why would I murder someone exactly 30 days to the day before killing her? Which doesn't make sense. And there were no injuries on her and injuries on me, but they kept insisting I was at fault. And they were sort of this pattern, this cyclical pattern of you blame the victim. You blame the victim, right?
Or let's call it what it is a little bit, because I've read the thing.
Yeah.
You're the right color. You're the right build. You're the right gender. All this makes sense this way, buddy. Just admit it. You did something. You did something that, and I know that there was even testimony that turned out to be false. That was detrimental. And when, I'll say this, when someone wants you and you're in official capacity and they want you to be that, whether it be a manager at work or like you said, a judge, a political system, a judicial system, they're going to make you question. I have friends who have been arrested for things they didn't do. And I've been told they felt like they were guilty, even though they knew they weren't. Like they looked at me and said, I was innocent for it. I didn't do anything. And I'll be honest, I started thinking I did do it. They almost get to that point where it was like, I was ready to confess because the tactics, like you're saying, I give you a lot of credit. It takes a lot for you to now take this journey and want to share it, because domestic abuse isn't a joke. It happens to men. It's happened to me. And you're right. I don't particularly talk about it, especially now the size I am. No one's going to think I get domestically abused. And that's dangerous. The idea that domestic abuse is also just about hands is wrong. Men are raised to take abuse. Like you were bleeding. That should have never happened. You should have been able to call the police, had her arrested, and that should have been the end of the game. But it sounds like you were already in a position where you knew, and I know this as a male, and I'll say this, when you're a male and you go to the divorce hearings and even child custody stuff, you having a dangly part, because we'll keep this as professional as possible, makes you the bad guy. The minute you enter that, no matter what, you are instantly the bad guy in those judicial systems. How do you find the courage, the energy, and the fortitude to keep going with this now, and not just because you got that comic coming out? It's got to be hard to be putting yourself publicly out there. How do you do that? I got to know.
Well, I know that there are other people here that are going through the same thing, but they're afraid or they don't know how to proceed. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
So I'm doing it for them. I mean, how many times I've been told by inmates in prison, you've got to go out there. You have it in you to go out there and talk. If not for yourself, but for the rest of us who just don't have the will or the ability to go out there and speak for ourselves. I also do it for my son because, now he's 16. I have to wait another 2 years before I can see him. And I want to do it for him too, because the world's not changing. It's not changing as fast as it should be. And I want, when he becomes, an adult, when he starts wanting to have his own family, to not have to go what I went through, just because his wife was manipulative, or vindictive or abusive or controlling in any manner. So I always look at the guys who can't come forward to talk because they don't have it in them. They don't have the will. They don't have the means. And also my son, and also, the future sons of, guys my age or younger. I really want to make this, a theme or where men don't have to, be afraid of not being believed, or they're afraid that their masculinity is going to be questioned because, of what they're going through at home. And it's hard. It's hard when you're a man, but it's also harder when you're not, pure blonde hair, blue eyed, a white guy, a Caucasian. Um, it hurt me when the media photographer, when I during my trial, the first trial, was calling me, the Canadian O.J. Simpson, and yet I found, well, wait, what? I said, I don't remember O.J. Simpson calling the police 3 months before, Nicole died, and for help. And I don't remember O.J. bleeding the time they arrested him. And so you're comparing me to, him because I'm a guy, and then I have a dead wife, and then a mother, and Nicole. They were saying Nicole was having, another man, in her romantic life, and because my wife had one too, so it's sort of similarities between you and OJ are there, but it's two different stories. We're talking about a guy who's trying to protect himself and his kids from his wife and her lover, and you're comparing OJ Simpson, who didn't go through that at all, but because we're both guys with darker skin complexions and our wives died, we're the same. It just doesn't make sense. And so I'm doing this because I want to educate people. All apples aren't the same. You got to look at the context. You have to look at the person and the circumstances they're going through. So that's where I'm finding my sort of energy source to go out there, and my courage to go out there and talk and tell people, you know what, it's time. It's our time now to say that we are equal partners in a marriage. In our mothers and grandmothers' generation, they fought to recognize that women, were not the properties of men, and they could not be abused or hit or controlled by their husbands. Now it's our turn. It's our generation to say it's the same thing. If we're going to be equal partners, husband and wife, or whatever, boyfriend, girlfriend, or even partner and partner, regardless of your sexual orientation, we're partners. What's good, whatever we can sort of say is inappropriate for one is certainly inappropriate and wrong for the other.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. And there have been studies about how dangerous we've gotten to this point where we are honestly allowing domestic abuse to happen because we think it's funny. You ever watch those videos where the guy gets hit for doing something by a woman and everyone laughs? If a guy even gets up and grabs a girl by a shirt, everyone wants to get involved. And it does have to go both ways. We need more education. And there are. I really hope to see your story get told in a very public as possible, because it is one of those things. As a dad raising a kid, I don't want to feel like my son ever feels like he has to take that kind of abuse, because we were raised in a different generation where we really didn't talk about things happening at home. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about what's happening at home. You as a man, you take it, right? That's the whole thing. As a man, you take it. You're going to be strong enough. What doesn't kill you will make you stronger. Exactly. Worst advice ever given to people.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, you said this is going to Hollywood, so hopefully we're going to see this as a movie. I got to ask the question. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. Who's playing you in the movie?
Well, we're still sort of looking.
No, in your mind, you have an actor. You have an actor that you're like, I would love for him to play me.
I've got a couple in mind, but honestly, I want to leave that into the hands of the Hollywood people. But I have had actors tell me they want roles in the movie. Robert Patrick, when I met him in Albany, New York, he wanted to play the judge that ordered me to go to trial. He read the part where he fell asleep during halfway through the presentation of the evidence. And then when he woke up at the end, he says, "You know what? I'm still going to put you to trial for murder." It's hilarious, and he couldn't believe it. Robert couldn't believe it, and you know what? It was so cool. Robert was so taken in by this story. He gave me his personal contact information so we can go bike riding next time I'm in Los Angeles.
And no, we're not sharing that today.
So I'm looking forward to riding his Harleys and, in downtown Los Angeles. It's great.
And that, it's so awesome that not only did you have support from him, but, a great advocate. He wrote, you want to tell people what the Stephen Amell Arrow star wrote to you?
Oh, yeah. So when I met him in Boston and I told him my story, he just couldn't believe it. And he's from Ontario, Canada, and this happened to me in Ontario, Canada. He couldn't believe it. And so, and he said it was a crappy thing to go through, and he was very disappointed in his home province in Canada. And so he just wrote there on I asked for his autograph, and he went beyond that. He goes, look, your city has failed you and your family, and that's a comment he always says in his TV show. That's the arrow, right? When he goes before he kills the bad guy, he goes, you have failed this city. Or he turned it around and goes, your city has failed you and your family. Then he says, I'm really sorry for what happened to you, and my condolences. And then it's just sort of that he supported me 100%, and that was very touching. But I got to be honest though, there was one actor who made me cry. There was one actor that I met. I remember it was December the 1st in Louisville, Kentucky, and he's living in New York now, originally from Virginia, and he made me cry because when I told him my story, this was John Wesley Shipp, and he's the actor who plays, I guess the Jay Garrick Flash, or he also played the father of the Flash on the current TV series. And when I told him my story, and he goes, "Are you still in Canada?" I go, "No, I'm back in New York State. I'm back in my hometown of New York State." He said, "Welcome home. Welcome back home." And that was the first time anybody told me to welcome back home, and I literally was holding back tears. We took a picture together, and he goes, "Look, I'm involved in the Innocence Project, which is where he goes, improves, he's part of a large group in America, United States, that goes around trying to prove people's innocence, people who are wrongfully imprisoned and convicted." And the fact that we're on ongoing communication. We send each other messages, on Facebook, on Instagram, sometimes, personal messages on DM. And he's really, really interested in knowing how everything's going to pan out with the movie and the book. And it really touches me that there are so many warm people in the industry that really, really support me 100%. So it's not only Stephen Amell, but it's also people like John Wesley Shipp, and of course, like I said, Robert Patrick. So, I mean,
let me ask you a quick question. I have to ask this. This happened in Ontario.
Yeah.
Do you think it would have been different in America? It's a question that, have you ever asked yourself that? Have you ever debated? I mean, because it sounds like this could be something out of America. I'll be honest, as someone who lives here, I have heard this disappointing pattern. I have been part of legislation for something completely different, and I've seen it where you're looked down on. They don't see your individuality, and I think that's the biggest problem with the courts. And that's clearly what happened here. You were just another case.
Yeah. Well, I was made to be the bad guy. There had to be a bad guy. It couldn't be her, and so it had to be me. But the first interview I did was with a retired federal prosecutor in the United States. He was in D.C. and now he's retired. He got his own radio show in Florida, and we looked at it from a legal perspective, right? And he said it was a bogus charge. It was a bogus trial, and if it happened in certain parts of the U.S., notably, the Upper East Coast, the charge would have been thrown out. It would be, and you wouldn't have gotten, this injustice thrown upon you and your family. But if it had happened in some of the southern states like Florida, Georgia, it probably would have happened the same thing. Same thing would have probably happened where they see this guy who's not quite sure, is sort of racially or ethnically ambiguous. He has a Southeast Asian wife that's now dead in his apartment. And they would have probably done the same thing. So depending on which part of the United States you are, you would either go through the same thing which I went through, or if you were sort of more open-minded and fair states, you wouldn't happen. It would have been thrown out. When they couldn't tell how she died, if they saw my injuries, they would have thrown it out, and I wouldn't have to go through this nightmare. So it depends where you are in the United States. Same thing could happen. If I was in New York State, I doubt very much that it would happen. If I was in Florida or Georgia, I don't know, or Mississippi, I wouldn't know. It's touch and go. There's no sense of confidence or that you were going to get a fair trial or not. It's really unfortunate, but that's the way our country is now.
I'll say this, just as a man in this society who's now single, I've gone through a divorce, and I have to date. I'll be honest with you, I find trouble wanting to date.
Yeah.
With everything that just goes on now, and men have never been made as much of a villain as they are now. And I'm not complaining, I'm not whining. That isn't what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I'm being honest here that as a man, you don't want these false accusations to ruin your life. I've known people who had false rape things,
Yeah.
and 90% of the time, I mean, how do you give back Jim anything? How do you give him back everything that's been taken from him? You don't. And this is hard. That's why we have to talk about domestic violence more. We have to have these conversations. As difficult as they may be, we have to continue these conversations to make sure that we eliminate it. Abuse on any, I don't care your gender. Abuse is abuse, and it's wrong, and it has to stop. And I've dealt with abuse in my life. And remember, there's emotional abuse, there's physical abuse, there's obviously sexual abuse, which makes a lot more of the headlines.
And there's financial abuse, right? Where she controls all the money and you can't really do anything with your own money, right? So.
Yeah, and even not just emotional but mental abuse. People don't realize there's a lot, and sometimes you might be guilty of it yourself, not realizing because you've been past that trait from someone. I grew up thinking yelling in a relationship is normal. If you love someone, you have to yell, right? That's part of a relationship. I heard my mom and dad did it. It's what mom and dad did, so I'll do it too. Please reassess. Try to stay calm-headed, cool-headed, however you want to put it, and don't get to a point where you're. The saddest part of this whole story is not only did Jim lose years of life, but he lost years of life with his children.
That's right.
You can't. I mean, sure, he got a little older. He's still got life ahead of him. You know, he can do something, and he is doing something with it. We're going to talk about that. We're going to take a couple extra minutes today and stay on because I want to talk about that graphic novel he's working on. But I mean, I can't stress this enough. The time you lose with children over this nonsense, and we hear it in the headlines. We hear all this going on, and it takes all of us to stand up. First off, no longer can we just say someone's guilty by the first headlines we hear. Because I guarantee you, Jim's headlines made him sound guilty as hell. 6 years to figure out this one moment where, oh, now it all makes sense. We have to stop that. We have to look for innocence first. Innocent until proven guilty, especially here in America. Second, you have to be willing to listen to Jim's side of the story. I know it's hard to always consider that there might not just be a clear-cut case, but 90% of the time it's not as simple as you would be led to believe. So support Jim when his book comes out. When is the book coming out? You said you had a book for it.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that it's coming out soon. It's in the sort of halfway through going through final edits, and then I have my own website. And so, I'm on. Just look me up on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. You'll find me, and then I'll make the big announcement. And there'll be the webpage link, which I'll share with you as well once it's up and running, and people will know exactly what day it's coming out. But we're hoping within the next couple of months.
Awesome.
So.
Now let's talk about comics. That's the whole reason we're a comic show. And it's the creative journey. Your creative journey. I just had something in comic book school. We gave away this free thing you can find at comicbookschool.com. 144 pages. I talked about my creative journey. And part of that was me getting my back hurt. And we talked about this before we went on air. I feel like I've not gone through anything compared to your story. But that's the important thing of getting your story out there, is to make other men feel to even stop it earlier, because I'm sure you feel like you wish you had stopped it a little earlier, so you can help make that happen. Will your graphic novel, will there be a comic book based on stuff like this, or is your graphic, I know you said you have a whole totally different idea, right?
Yeah.
So
So like I said, I had this idea since I was 15 years old, before I got, seduced into the rock and roll sort of business. It's sort of along the lines of The Boys or Squadron Supreme, where you have these bunch of superheroes that are either created or discovered by the government, and then the people think, oh wow, now we're in this wonderful country that's protected with superheroes, but behind it there's sort of a more sinister purpose behind it, and so there's a twist. There's a difference between what you see in The Boys or what you see in Squadron Supreme. Is that and I'll give you a sort of brief sort of synopsis of it, is that the government runs out of money and they can't fund this program where they have these superheroes go around protecting the interests of the United States. And so you've got corporation coming in and saying, you know what, we got money, we'll just put ads all over their costumes, and and then we'll just sort of everywhere they go, we'll have like the McDonald's flag over here saying, okay, we've got this superhero, and he's promoting French fries, at McDonald's, and so it sort of borders along what's going on with the boys theme, where now you've got corporate interests, behind the superheroes, which are supposed to be, sort of protecting the United States and also, going and getting involved in American interests abroad. But now you say, well, where does their loyalty lie? Is the superheroes there for the American people, or is it there for the American government? Is it there for corporations? And so it's a very interesting concept, and it's sort of a point in sort of my sort of synopsis or sort of my draft. It gets ridiculous where they're stopping for photo ops, and they'll hold up after they're beating up a bad guy. The photographers come, they hold up a bar of Colgate, because they're promoting Colgate. Next time, oh, this bad guy had bad breath. You can avoid the bad breath and bad teeth by brushing your teeth twice a day with Colgate toothpaste. And so that's that. It's sort of tongue in cheek, but there's a deeper message in there. We're saying, well, when do we start being moralistic and start being immoral because of outside influence and because of money? And so that's what the basic premise of the graphic novel is. So I've had the story broken up into 6 parts, and I'm just looking for an artist. I've been speaking to a number of artists, both in the United States and Canada, and negotiating how I can sort of work with them during their free time, and also on an amount that I can afford to pay them to release this, hopefully within the next 2 years.
I can't wait. I'll be here to advocate for you when it comes out. That sounds awesome. I've always thought about like the superhero thing, like making them like the NASCAR, where they have just things all over them. Like I keep waiting for Batman to have like Warner Brothers in his corner just to promote it. I can't wait for that. I really hope that you have the all the success with not only the graphic novel, but obviously the story. Because I do think it's an important conversation, and it's Martin Luther King Day, and I have this thing every Martin Luther King Day. I wake up and I listen to his speech, not the I Have a Dream little portion, but the entire speech.
Yeah.
And it dawned on me that when I was going to be meeting with you today, that we're still failing at bringing that society that is what we could have, and that's fairness, justice, and all that. And it takes people like you standing up, because so many people who have gone through something bad want to run from it and not talk about it. So I applaud you for having the strength and the character to do that. And you're awesome. Keep being awesome, man. I hope you get your kids back sooner than later. I know how important being a parent is. I'm sorry, because we didn't even really talk about how they just took your kids away, the worst feeling in the world. So I really hope that you wind up getting millions upon millions. It becomes like the Oscar winner, so we can all have this conversation and maybe find a more honest center where we all are equal. Because, I mean, that's really what this came down to, equality and the lack of there being equality. So you have the last word as we leave the show today. Well, tell them anything you want.
Well, like I said, my book is quite massive, and I do quote a lot of influential people in the world, whether it's Winston Churchill or even Martin Luther King. And I remember when they finally told me that I was free from all this nightmare, I remember in my head I was quoting, Martin Luther King, where he said, free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last. My book is there to influence people, not only with my story, but also it looks at people that influenced me, whether it was Gandhi, whether it was Winston Churchill, whether it was, FDR, Mr. Kennedy, President Kennedy, whether it's, Martin Luther King. If you want to go, if you're religious and you're going and you want to talk about whether it's Jesus or Muhammad or, Abraham, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you got to find that person or those people which will influence you, to find the strength within you to go on and fight for what you believe in. It doesn't matter if it's not domestic violence, it's something else, it's child abuse or whatever. You have to find it because chances are you're doing something that somebody wishes they could have done, but they can't for one reason or another do it. And that's really what it comes down to, is finding that fiery source in you to stand up for what you believe in. But basically, that's all I have to say, you know. But that's why I'm doing it, because I'm finding the energy inside me to do it, because other people have told me they can't do it. They're counting on me, relying on me to do it on their behalf.
And I thank you for your time, Jim. It's been wonderful to sit down. I hope we get you on some panels, see some comic book work, even follow up with you, you know, see how everything is going. I appreciate you sharing your journey with us today. And that's it for our program today. I mean, today's MLK's birthday. We can all take a moment to reflect and start to plan how to make the world better for everyone around us, including our country and countries around us, by listening to people like Jim and hearing their stories, and maybe just changing our minds on how we view the world around us. We'll see you tomorrow at 11 for
Thanks for having me.
What's that?
Thanks for having me on the show, Rob.
Anytime. And that's it for now. Remember, stay in touch with everyone and be cool.